I would argue that our field actually faces a little bit of risk as more and more graduating fellows go into private practice, that if we don't encourage them to continue to contribute academically or privatemically, as the case may be, our research output will atrophy. And I think that even is happening a little bit.
This episode was brought to you by AIVF, the innovators behind the EMA platform. The EMA platform is designed to empower fertility clinics with cutting-edge AI technology, enhancing the precision and success of treatments. It's not just a tool. It's a game changer in reproductive medicine. Learn how EMA can grow your fertility's efficiencies by going to aivf.co/precalc. That's aivf.co/precalc.
Today's advertiser helped make the production and delivery of this episode possible for free to you. But the themes expressed by the guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Inside Reproductive Health, nor of the advertiser. The advertiser does not have editorial control over the content of this episode, and the guest's appearance is not an endorsement of the advertiser.
Research output in the field of REI has atrophied. That's according to today's guest and her colleagues. We examined some problems taking place in the fertility field. The demand for ART services greatly outweighs the supply. We need to adopt technology that makes the clinic and lab safer, faster, more efficient. We need to do that yesterday in order to start making a dent in the supply and demand issue. But clinicians and scientists need to be able to prove that those solutions are in fact safe and effective. And this is where Privademics might come into play. Dr. Kate Devine is Medical Director and Chief Research Officer at US Fertility. She's an OBGYN clinical professor at George Washington University. She's the Associate Program Director for REI, for the fellowship program, that is, at NIH. She's the chair of the SREI Research Committee. She's the chair of the SART QA Committee, and she's on the editorial board for Fertility and Sterility. She practices for Shady Grove in the DC area. And so I get Dr. Devine's thoughts on why research output in REI has atrophied in her view, what specific research needs to be done to improve ingenuity and innovation, how Privademics addresses the supply and demand issue by training more REIs, APPs, and OBGYNs. Dr. Devine shares her thoughts on if all academic programs will and should be Privademic programs, and she talks about some massive advantages that Privademic programs have. She talks about the powerful research database that US Fertility has, doing approximately 20% of the IVF cycles in the country, and the collaboration that they have between research and fellowship programs, being affiliated with 5 of them across the network. Dr. Devine talks about how Privademics can evaluate and adopt new technology faster and to a higher standard of quality control. And she talks about some technology she's paying attention to. And we start with her definition of Privademic practice, which is more robust than mine. Enjoy this interview with Dr. Kate Devine. Dr. Devine, Kate, welcome to the Inside Reproductive Health podcast.
Thanks so much, Griffin. I'm thrilled to be here.
It's been a little while since I've talked about the Privademic model. We've introduced it on the show, but I don't know if we've ever done an episode dedicated to going through the Privademic model, to going through the future of what it looks like. As I was preparing for the interview, I started to think, is this what academic medicine is going to become universally? Will all academic medicine be Privademic? And so I guess I'll start with what I think my definition of Privademic REI medicine is, and you'll correct me and maybe give us a more comprehensive definition. But I think of Privademic medicine as an academic or health system REI division that has partnered, often in equity partnership, but maybe not always, with a privately owned fertility center network that may be private equity backed, that may be venture backed, that may be just regular independently owned network, if there still are some of those left. But I think of the REI division from a university health system that is partly owned, and if not partly owned, partly operated, and operated in conjunction with a privately owned network. How close am I to the correct definition?
I think that's pretty accurate. I would be even more expansive than that in my definition. I'd also quibble a little bit with the equity portion being part of the definition. I would say that's pretty uncommon, actually, for the university-based REI practice to be owners in the practice that is private practice that's participating, and certainly vice versa. It can happen, but I would say that's not really part of the definition. Everything else is spot on. I'd say that essentially we are in a position where a lot of the volume in terms of the practice of fertility medicine has shifted out of the university setting, and fellows need experience and fellowships need funding. And so from the fellowship training portion of this and even residency training portion of this, universities have a need, and private practices have the ability to fill that need, particularly if they are practicing evidence-based medicine and have academically interested REIs. The other piece of this, though, is I would expand Privademics even beyond those practices that are necessarily affiliated with a fellowship or university. I think of it as basically wanting to keep moving the ball forward academically, intellectually, and in terms of the knowledge base of our field, whether or not you are at an academic institution. So wanting to practice evidence-based medicine and do research. So contribute to academia, whether you're there or not.
What does that contribution look like, though? Because then can't anybody that just submits an abstract each year say, I'm doing Private-emic medicine, I'm advancing research. How would you qualify those contributions?
100%. And I think that that's fine. There's no limitation to the number of card-carrying Privademics there can be out there. And I would argue that our field actually faces a little bit of risk as more and more graduating fellows go into private practice, that if we don't encourage them to continue to contribute academically or privatemically, as the case may be, our research output will atrophy. And I think that even is happening a little bit. And certainly our ability to train enough high quality REs will atrophy if we don't have private practicing REIs contributing to education. And so if somebody hangs a shingle, which you know as well as I do is a little bit harder and harder to do all the time in this field, and decides that they want to do research, God bless them. And of course, there's a peer review process to make sure that the research is a legitimate contribution. And then hopefully that doc decides over time that they do want to affiliate with the university and train, up and coming OBGYNs and REIs as well.
You said that the research output might already be atrophying a bit. What specifically makes you say that?
They'll remain nameless, but even speaking with some of my colleagues who work hard to, make sure that our output as a field in terms of our main fertility journals stays strong and again contributes to advancing patient care and our technology and our abilities, have told me that they think that the quantity and quality, more so quality, of the submissions seems to be going down.
I'm a lay person. I have no clinical or scientific background. So when the quality is going down, does that mean the robustness of what they're attempting to study, or does it mean that some basic tenets of research are not being followed?
I think both things. I think just the ingenuity, the innovation, in terms of just being bravely going out there and trying to answer the unanswered questions. There's maybe a little bit less of that going on as fewer and fewer REs kind of see research as part of their vocation. So I would say in terms of how novel the body of research that we're producing, that is seems to be less. I mean, I'm sure you heard or have heard at some national meetings, people saying, "Oh, it's all the same stuff. Not learning anything." And part of that is we're approaching an asymptote as a field that we've gotten very good at this, right? But I think part of it is that while we are increasing in being entrepreneurial as fellowship graduates, that comes to some extent at the expense of fellows wanting to do research. And it's not a coincidence. They also are having lower and lower requirements for research as part of their fellowship training.
Why is that?
Well, I think it's multifactorial. Part of it is the demand of the fellows, saying that if they're not going to do research for their whole lives, why would they need to do 18 out of 36 months of their fellowship doing research? Part of it is diminution in the number of and hours available from university-based faculty to mentor fellows in research. But most immediately, it's ABOG and ACGME who make the rules in terms of what's required to sit for your boards, have reduced the requirement. And I think they feel that they are being pragmatic and answering a need that's based largely on also increasing number of things to learn over the course of a fellowship, and cutting back, therefore, on the number of months spent on research.
So this is kind of happening at the same time as people are debating, should the REI fellowship be 3 years at all? Should it only be 2 years? And then if it is only 2 years, what gets cut? What is condensed into those 2 years? How much does this need for research play into that debate? Where do you stand on that side of the question?
So, I actually am of the mind that I think there should be a 2-year option. I do think more important than making sure that every single fellow comes out being an academic and a researcher is that we meet the demand of the population. And we are not meeting it now, and we sure as heck are not going to be meeting it as the demand continues to rise, as has been predicted. It's a very controversial topic. We just published this white paper in Fertility and Sterility just in advance of ASRM. We had about 27 REIs, or 27 authors, including REIs, as well as APPs, who really kind of hotly debated this. And, there has been a expert panel that met, that was convened by ASRM, that came to the conclusion that it should be 2 years. Our group, by and large, and in garnering support from the various stakeholders, ABOG, ACGME, and most importantly, SREI, ASRM, and SART, ultimately decided that to recommend 2 years was too likely to just result in a diminution of the funding that's available, that chairs of OBGYN programs would not allocate the saved monies from going down by a year to additional spots. That was what we heard from most REI program directors. And so basically it would just be less training, but not necessarily more fellows. I do think in programs where the feedback is they could get more fellows by offering a 2-year option, that should be piloted. That's my personal opinion. And I do think that if it enables us to train more fellows, and I think it can be structured such that it could, that should be an option. There are going to be those fellows that are extremely talented and driven towards research. And there could be 3-year programs for them, or they can apply for postgraduate K-level funding with directed training, so that we are sort of focusing the resources on the most talented and ambitious people who want to conduct high-quality research.
In your view, would that option be based on program? Would every program have a 2-year option, or would some programs be 2 years and some programs be 3?
I think it would work best as the latter. GYN Oncology has done this for years now. where some programs are 3 years and some programs are 4 years. And so based on interest level, fellows will opt in or out of a 3-year program. And the third year could be focused on different things for different programs. Everyone has to meet a certain baseline level of knowledge base and curriculum. But then some programs would have an extra year that was focused on reproductive surgery. Some programs would have an extra year that was focused on, obtaining an HCLD and learning more in the embryology laboratory. Some programs would have an extra year that was focused on research, whether that be clinical research or bench science.
Tell us more about this paper. I've seen it circulated on LinkedIn. You said there's 27 authors on the paper. Even before we get to some more of the findings, what did the paper set out to do?
So the paper set out to define the scope of the problem in terms of the supply-demand issue that we're facing as a field, both now and in the foreseeable future, and also to start to identify some potential solutions, and then really largely to enliven this conversation, because we are way late to trying to address this as a field. As we both know, industry is actively working on trying to solve this problem already in a way that will be as profitable as possible for them. As REIs, we want to do it in a way that is as safe as possible for the population. And so that's what we set out to do. And it took us a year to publish what ultimately at the end, frankly, isn't an ironclad plan by any stretch of the imagination. But essentially what it concludes is that we need to train more fellows. We need to make appropriate use of other professionals in this field, especially nurse practitioners and physician assistants. And ASRM is hosting a meeting in a few weeks, actually convening experts to try to figure out what's the best way to train and certify, these professionals. And then also we need to make as responsible use of the available technology to make the process more efficient.
EMA stands out with its advanced AI algorithms that analyze vast amounts of data to provide accurate predictions and insights. This means higher success rates and more personalized care for patients. Plus, its user-friendly interface makes it accessible to all healthcare professionals. Notably, a study showed that embryo evaluation performance time was reduced by 83% when using the EMA software platform, significantly enhancing efficiency in IVF labs. For clinics, EMA offers a new level of efficiency and effectiveness in treatment planning. For patients, it means a journey filled with hope and increased chances of success. In research, EMA demonstrated high consistency with embryologist grading and was 45 times faster than manual evaluation, affirming its efficiency in IVF settings. Discover how EMA by AIVF can revolutionize your fertility treatment experience. Visit aivf.co/precalc to use their exclusive cost efficiency calculator powered by EMA. That's aivf.co/precalc.
So how would you say that you defined the scope of the problem? You talked a little bit about it. It likely involves training and certifying APPs. There's technology involved. But in terms of the words that you ended up all coming to, and when you think back to the paper now, how do you define the scope of the problem of supply and demand as it is now?
Well, so right now, 40 years into the history of ART, even a little bit more than that, we've got 10 million kids that have been born from ART. And if you think about the world population and the number of births per year, which is somewhere around 150 million, and the fact that the incidence of infertility is around 9%, and then there's lots of other indications for ART other than infertility. We really, in theory, and this is a pretty conservative estimate, should be able to help 20 million children be born per year. So, of course, we're talking globally, and not all of the infrastructure is in place to make that happen anytime in the near future. But if we really wanted to help everyone that needs our help, I think that is the magnitude by which we're underserving the demand.
I suspect that there's a role that Privademic plays in getting us to a point where we can meet that demand globally. And the reason I'm pulling at that thread is not just because I want to weave the two topics together, but I perceive them to be related. Partly because of the tension that you described of you've got the industry side that wants to go full tilt or is incentivized to go at full speed. And then perhaps you have an academic system that it has atrophied on its research capability. And perhaps the bridge between those lies somewhere in Privademics. Where do you see Privademic in this greater struggle, if for lack of a better word, to expand the supply to meet the demand for infertility services?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's in point 1, point 2, and point 3, training more fellows is the responsibility of every REI. It's actually, otherwise we're going to put ourselves out of a job if we don't. To also be part of the conversation as to how do we most responsibly use and work with our colleagues that are, advanced practice practitioners, providers, and then also to be extremely open-minded and curious about the technologies that are available, while also being incredibly rigorous about validating those technologies prior to implementing them. And so to the first point about training more fellows, people in strictly academic settings think of this and they start to have palpitations because they say every RE in New York City is gonna just open up a fellowship and start training a fellow that just plan to hire. They're not going to give them really high quality training, and the field that we love is going to lose a knowledge of endocrine and genetics and everything else that is, and I agree, intrinsic to the richness of our knowledge and our ability to manage complex cases. That, in fact, cannot happen. And so many changes in our system would have to happen. There are so many checks and balances to prevent that. So first of all, you have to be affiliated with an OBGYN department that has a residency to be able to train a fellow. So you can't just say, I'll train you, you'll be certified, and then, by the way, you also have to work for me afterwards or something like that. I would hope that our ethical standards would discourage that anyway, but there are other things to discourage it too. And in fact, despite the increasing demand, there have been fewer, the number of fellowship slots has not increased in recent years. The number of new slots has basically evened out with the number of closing, and it's incredibly challenging to get approved to open a new fellowship slot. One of the recommendations of the paper is actually for programs who are experienced in expanding a fellowship or opening a fellowship to help mentor and be a resource to programs that want to add slots, because there have been a number of applications that have been denied in recent years, probably just due to inexperience in the process and knowing kind of how to apply, for lack of a more complicated explanation. So at the end of the day, I too want fellows to have an extremely rigorous training and to have a rich knowledge to be able to oversee and certify APPs and make sure that they deliver high quality care. And I actually don't think that some of the requirements, including to be affiliated with an REI or an REI fellowship and to be affiliated with a residency, should change.
What role does Privademic have in training OBGYNs outside of an REI fellowship, if any? So this is another debate that's going on concurrently, is how much should generalist OBGYNs be trained to do without having to be fellowship trained in REI? And still seems like a pretty contentious topic. I think that it's shifting. It seems to be in the last few years. But I was at an event at ASRM where there was a British REI that was perplexed that generalist OBGYNs aren't trained to do things like retrievals and even transfers. And this individual said, "Where I come from, if you can deliver a baby, you can suck an egg." And there was a number of REIs in attendance that agreed with that statement. There are still some that do not agree with that statement. But I'm curious, without getting so much into that debate, because it's its own topic, what role does Privademic play in training OBGYNs outside of fellowship, if any?
Yeah, my opinion is that the fellowships train OBGYN residents to know what they need to know about fertility medicine to be able to practice general OBGYN and hopefully to induce some of them to pursue a fellowship. I am of the mind that generalist OBGYNs should collaborate closely with REIs. I think that they are can safely do ovulation induction. I think that they can be a huge resource, especially our minimally invasive gynecologic surgeon colleagues in doing some of the cases that, REIs that are involved very deeply in endocrine or an ART maybe don't have the time or haven't maintained their skills to be able to perform. I do think that it's a challenging question because we don't want to define being an REI as the ability to do an egg retrieval or an embryo transfer, because that's not it. That's those are both fairly simple technical skills, but they are not all created equal. And again, the management of complex cases is something that's well outside the scope of somebody who hasn't done an REI fellowship, which at this point is still 3 full additional years of training.
So that question ties into what is the future of the REI? What is the future role and responsibilities of the REI if more people are being trained to do retrievals and transfers? Retrievals and transfers don't comprise what an REI is or does, and ostensibly with AI, you'll have a much greater caseload and REIs over more cases. And maybe it goes back to what you mentioned earlier in the interview of wanting more ingenuity and innovation from the research. So let's talk a little bit about that. What does ingenuity and innovation in the research look like, and how does it develop the REI's role?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are lots of different fronts where I think we hopefully will see innovation, where I would like to see innovation. I think towards that goal that we've also been talking about, which is to help the 20 million babies that would be wanted be born every year. And so I agree with you in the setting of AI and automation. I think that in future decades, the REI will likely be overseeing APPs who are appropriately trained and certified, managing a much larger caseload per REI. And I think that and hope that more and more graduating fellows will take on a Privademic stance and see it as their responsibility to help train the next generation of REIs and also to do research. There's plenty of scientists and entrepreneurs out there that are developing technology that hold great promise. For better or worse, given the regulatory environment in our country, the actual responsibility of validating those technologies falls on REIs, and that's not something that's likely to be done in a university-based setting. That is likely something that will be done in a Privademic setting, if at all, and it's our responsibility not to just implement without validating. And so I think REIs and Privademic settings in coming years, in addition to managing more cases and overseeing, their team in managing more cases, should also be actively involved in doing studies, appropriately designed studies, to validate technology before they're implemented on a large scale.
I want to explore more about what validation of technologies looks like, but staying on the research that you'd like to see. If you had your druthers, what would Privademic REIs be researching more of if we were to say in 2 years, you know what, it's no longer the case that research is atrophying in REI. It's no longer the case that we're not seeing as much ingenuity and innovation in the research as we'd like. We're seeing plenty of it, and here's what's happened. If you had your druthers, what would that research be specifically?
I think there's a couple different realms that it could, that are my favorites, I guess I should say. So was talking about validation, and there are plenty of folks out there that are working on laboratory automation. And I think that laboratory automation and the implementation of AI together have the potential to help us get to where we want to be in terms of serving the number of people. But it's super scary to let the machine do IVF for us, right? And so one really important, and again, this is not ingenuity so much as being extremely conservative, right? And cautious, is to make sure that whatever it is that we are allowing to create embryos and manage our laboratories has been tested against the current standard of care as being just as effective in achieving success for our patients, and also of great importance is, of course, safety. So I hope that that's something that Privademics is ideally placed to be able to do. Other areas that I think hold massive promise, but are extremely challenging to do research in academic settings in the United States because of the Dickey-Wicker Amendment, and because no NIH funding can be used to do any research involving human embryos, is just, again, the potential of genetics to cure and prevent disease. And so the applications of that are massive and varied, but our field is ideally placed to be able to help to support and participate in that research. And again, even the smartest scientists in university-based settings need foundation funding to be able to do it. So I hope that's something that great scientists housed in universities and private practices will partner together to work on in the coming decade.
Do you work on multiple research projects at once? Do you do, like the paper that you just finished, do you do one of those and then do you take a breather and start the next? Or do you work on multiple projects concurrently? What does your Privademic practice look like?
Busy. So, we have currently 5 REI fellowships that we're affiliated with at US Fertility. And all of those fellows, as we discussed, has research as a requirement as part of their fellowship. And so, I'm doing a dozen projects at once, all with lots of help. We have 2 PhDs in epidemiology, a number of physician scientists at US Fertility that are really committed to research and education. I'm working currently on industry-sponsored trials, NIH-funded trials. The NAPRO study is focused on maternal fetal health following frozen embryo transfer, given how many kids are going to be born from frozen embryo transfers in the coming decade. I think that's one way that we absolutely must contribute, is to make sure we're doing it in the safest way possible. And then, we have, with the help of AI and improved data analytics, really, in my opinion, the most powerful research database out there, because we have so much granular information, much more so than, some of the databases that are amazing that they've collected in Europe over the years, or even that SART has collected, and very involved in SART and SART research. But you're limited by the quality of the data entry and the number of fields. And so we have a database that has enabled us to kind of answer really almost any question that somebody has about what if you change this, or if you do this in ART, how will it affect the outcome? And there are myriad outcomes that can be evaluated. And so it's a huge resource for our trainees, and thankfully, and we hope to get better and better over time. But we hope that it is also benefiting our patients, because we're able to figure out the best way to do stuff.
And so you yourself are working with all 5 of these programs. You don't work with, let's say, just Jones over here for this Shady Grove Fellowship partnership. You're saying you at a network level are working with all 5 of the academic programs?
So I'm an associate program director for the NIH fellowship, so I work most closely with that fellowship. And each fellowship program has its own academic infrastructure. So it would be incredibly irresponsible for one person to be overseeing 5 different fellowships. That's not the case. But my responsibility, and really joy, is to oversee the interaction between those fellowships and US Fertility. So to help them with their US Fertility-based research projects, as well as to help with their clinical rotations that occur at US Fertility, which are largely apprenticeships, as is kind of the tradition of training in academic medicine. And so, we actually started a new research rotation, which we've all been super excited about. We've done twice now, where all of the fellows from all of the various 5 fellowship programs come for 1 month, and they have the opportunity to come in person or attend virtually. Most do come in person to Rockville, and they are paired 1-to-1 with a research mentor. They have a project defined in advance of coming to the rotation. They have a data set, a statistical analysis plan, and over the course of that 1 month, as a team, the 4 or 5 fellows that are there help troubleshoot each other's manuscripts with the help of their dedicated statistician and mentor. It's been incredibly fun. They have structured didactics, and they really learn soup to nuts how to do a good research project.
So this is an interesting way of thinking about the future of Privademic that I hadn't really thought about. I always thought about it 1-to-1, Mount Sinai, RMA of New York, NIH, Shady Grove, USC, HRC, always kind of just thought about it 1-to-1. But when you're talking about the network level, you're introducing a couple more dynamics, one of which is the pure volume that you have to be able to study. You have a lot more data to be able to study, because there's a lot more cycles happening over that many places with that many labs with that many docs. But the second is that a network can be affiliated with multiple university system, multiple fellowship programs in multiple areas, and there's a way to bring those in the fellows and the researchers and the scientists from those institutions together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And honestly, it's a way for the fellows to network across a much broader swatch of the field. With as a national network, they meet, other trainees from all over the country. We're pretty dogged about making sure that they're paired with a research mentor that is outside their home institution, so they get to know that person well and expand their professional network. And yes, the big data is a massive asset that this provides, with somewhere around 20% of the cycles in the country, but with, every being able to access nearly every data point that one might need for research. It's extremely powerful.
Do you think that for these reasons and the other ones that we discussed, that all academic medicine will have to be Privademic in the coming years, that all of the uh, hospital system and university system REI divisions will have to be affiliated with networks, or at the very least large practices, for these reasons?
Don't think so, and I sure hope not, honestly. I gave a talk recently at the Fellow Symposium in Park City about Privademics. And I said this, and I really mean it, that if a fellow is graduating and just wants to be a basic scientist or do translational research, please do it. We need those people who are really doing the basic work. That is kind of the seed that inspires everything that downstream. And I think that's really hard to do in a private practice. Now, might there be a day where private practice is actually funding that research and that academic programs come to rely almost entirely on the big networks to train the upcoming REIs? Maybe. But I don't think so. There are still things that can only be done in a university. The converse is definitely also true, but I really think we need both things.
So let's talk about the evaluation of technology as part of the crux of private and academic, and uh, what can be solved for uniquely with Privademic, because you mentioned that if just at the academic level, a lot of this technology isn't going to be implemented, but you also need the research to evaluate it. So talk to us about a couple of technologies that you're paying it to. You mentioned AI lab automation, but talk to us about a couple of technologies that you're paying attention to, and what is the appropriate level of adoption. Okay, it's being adopted somewhere at the clinic level, while it's still being researched.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think that anything should be adopted at the clinic level commercially and sold to patients until it has been proven to be effective and safe. Full stop. Our patients are desperate, and they will do anything we say if they think it's going to help them have a baby. And we all took an oath to first do no harm. It's my opinion that if we are charging patients and exposing them to anything invasive, or even any lag in initiating what is standard proven treatment, we are doing harm if we don't have really compelling reason to believe that it works. And so I think that we should absolutely be participating in studies to do those things. And we just published earlier this year a trial on ERA, which we all had great hope for, that was in JAMA, I think, just because of this phenomenon, not because it's like such a groundbreaking thing to publish a negative study, but essentially because it is really important that we don't implement add-ons before we know that they work. And so we are working with a number of AI companies and participating in their studies to validate. We are also working with a couple of different sperm selection companies to validate those technologies, which I think hold great promise if they were to be helpful. But until those things kind of come to bear, and I sure hope they do, of course, anything that we can do to help us kind of raise that asymptote that we've approached in terms of success rates be massive. It also goes to our overall goal of helping people have more babies and being more efficient, right? If we have to do fewer cycles and fewer transfers, that's efficiency, and that's helping the population. So, I think that we have to bear in mind in the meantime that people get desperate after one unsuccessful transfer. That doesn't mean that you start like throwing the kitchen sink at the problem. We know that after 3 optimized transfers, based on Pertea's data, we get up to 95% chance of a baby. And so we really need to take the time to counsel patients that these things are not validated and to say, keep calm and do another transfer until we know for sure that these things work.
What about like partial implementations or maybe partial utilization? I think of if many of these solutions, maybe they're still working towards FDA approval, or they're still working on they're still working on their studies, but they have a workflow component that they solve for, that they can streamline things and require fewer man hours. And so how do you think about that when the clinical benefit may maybe yet to be proven, but in the meantime there's a clear workflow benefit? How do you think about those types of solutions?
Yeah, I mean, the devil's in the details for sure. We could talk through specific examples, but at the end of the day, if it's no harm and it's improving workflow. So one good example of this is quick warming. Right? I don't know if you've heard anything about this, but it used to take hours to warm an embryo for frozen embryo transfer, and now many labs, and we're about to publish these data, presented them at ASRM. We're doing it in minutes, and there's enough data to show that there's minimal harm. That I think that is completely reasonable to implement. And some things very much fall on the side of QA, right? And so if you are able to do appropriate QA in your lab, and every lab should do this independently on these technologies, even if there's published data that show it to work in one center, you have to show it in yours too. But not everything needs a randomized controlled trial. And so, yes, things that improve workflow and there's no biologically plausible reason why you think it would cause harm, and you have enough data in your own center to show that it hasn't, I think that's totally appropriate.
How about networks and centers paying to be involved in certain trials? Or if there's some of these companies might be ready for prime time, some of them might not be. But at a market level, me just standing back and not having a clinical dog in the fight, I can't evaluate these products based on scientific or clinical quality, but I can see there is a market issue where they're not getting the adoption because they're not advancing, with their findings, because they're not getting the adoption necessary, and the centers want to see maybe more proof from studies. How do you view if they've got low cost, if they have a low cost barrier to entry and it looks like they've got something promising, the centers paying these places that are still doing studies, these companies that are still doing studies?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that particular model. I mean, I guess you're saying there is commercial uptake before the study's done or before approval comes through, or maybe they're using it off label or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I think you got to be pretty convinced by those data before you would ever have your patient buy it, or even if you're buying it and it's a cost that's passed along to them. really the way that it should happen, and I think it mostly is that at a minimum, I mean, these companies that are bringing these add-ons to market, that again, I hope that they all work together and create the miracle solution to help us administer patient care more successfully. But they should be offering it for free under a research protocol until the data are robust. If they are, great. By all means, clinical adoption is appropriate. But really the and this is a whole other conversation, but they can't afford to pay the centers because they're startups, but they really should be paying the centers to do the research, right? That's the way it works with more established companies like pharma, et cetera.
I think it's part of the challenge, and I think we'll see the rise of who's going to be the companies standing. But I think one of the challenges that they're facing is that what their investors are looking for is, are people willing to pay for this? But there's a huge upfront cost to be able to create something that clinicians are willing to pay for the reasons that you're talking about. And so we've explored a lot with regard to Privademic medicine. Will it make academic medicine obsolete? How is it involved in evaluating new technologies? What is the specific research that you'd like to see that would show more ingenuity and more innovation and stop the atrophy of research in REI? What is Privademic's role in training APPs, OBGYNs, and REI fellows? We've covered a lot of ground. Kate, how would you like to conclude on the topic of Privademic medicine?
I would say that we need to better serve the population of Americans and people globally who need fertility services. We are not training enough REIs. The industry side and the academic side are both going to be instrumental in solving this problem together, and we need to collaborate. We should do so in a way that maintains a high quality of research output. And we need to bear in mind always that as industry is involved and should be and must be, we need to validate any newcomer to patient clinical care to make sure that we are first doing no harm.
Dr. Kate Devine, thank you very much for coming on the Inside Reproductive Health podcast.
Thanks very much, Griffin.
This episode was brought to you by AIVF, the innovators behind the EMA platform. The EMA platform is designed to empower fertility clinics with cutting-edge AI technology, enhancing the precision and success of treatments. It's not just a tool. It's a game changer in reproductive medicine. Learn how EMA can grow your fertility's efficiencies by going to aivf.co/precalc. That's aivf.co/precalc.
Today's advertiser helped make the production and delivery of this episode possible for free to you. But the themes expressed by the guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Inside Reproductive Health, nor of the advertiser. The advertiser does not have editorial control over the content of this episode, and the guest's appearance is not an endorsement of the advertiser. Thank you for listening to Inside Reproductive Health.